Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new week. We're still under partial lockdown here in Kampala in Uganda, so I'm continuing to do some more thoughts from the Bible this week. And if you've been here for a few videos recently, you'll know that I've been working through a bit of the Old Testament history books in the Bible. We had a good long look at the life of David together, and then we spent a little bit of time with his son Solomon as well. But I find the end of Solomon's life to be such a sobering part of the Bible. This was a man who had a real passion for God, who had heard God speaking directly to him on multiple occasions. He was a man who established a beautiful place of worship for God, the temple. This was a man that people looked at and saw God's influence on every area of his life. And yet, this is what 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 to 3 has to say about the end of Solomon's life. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. Now, I don't think Solomon woke up one morning and said, all right, I'm done with that. Time to find myself a new God. I don't think that he would have intended to be swayed by the foreign gods that his wives worshipped. I just think that he liked women and that he was gradually swayed by them, maybe gradually worn down by them. Come on, Solomon, just come with me this one time to worship Ashtoreth. He was influenced by the women in his life, and gradually, one little tiny step at a time, his heart was turned away from the Lord. Well, that tends to be the way influence works, isn't it? If something really obvious came into our lives, our guards would be up. A full-blown addiction doesn't walk in one day and say, "Hey, how'd you like to let me in?" It starts with an odd drink, an odd bet, an odd little bit of fun with your friends. It can't hurt. A way to ease a pain. A bad relationship doesn't announce itself on day one or we'd run for the hills. It may seem like something happy and healthy until you wake up one day and wonder what you've got yourself into and how on earth you're going to get yourself out of it. Small influences can make big impacts, one day at a time. And so we need to be careful who or what we're being influenced by. Little things that we allow a place in our hearts can grow into much bigger things that can bring separation between us and God. Things that can turn our hearts away from the Lord. And there are so many influences screaming at us all the time. Our cultures, our friends, our families, our workplaces, the media. We are constantly bombarded by messages that tell us that we should look and act in a certain way. And it's ever so easy to allow those messages to take root inside of us. 1 John chapter 5, verse 21 tells us, it says, keep yourselves from idols. Another translation says, keep away from anything that might take God's place in your hearts. Now, we may not have 700 wives or husbands nagging us every day, but there are other things. This is a really stark warning not to put up with anything that might take God's place in our hearts, but to keep away from those things altogether. that can be really, really difficult to do. But it comes back to the question of what is the most important thing in your life? What is the most important thing to you? What matters the most in your life? Last week I talked about the wonder of knowing Jesus, of knowing God. There is no greater thing than that. But is that what matters the most to you today? It might be a good time to do an influence check right now. What is influencing you for good or for bad? There can be positive influences, of course, things that can help us in our time here on earth. But it's still good to acknowledge what of the things that we hold in our lives are positive and what of those things are negative. And there's a surefire way of checking if an influence is a good thing or a bad thing. And it's just by asking one simple question. Does this thing in my life draw me closer to God, or does it push me further away from Him? Does it strengthen your reliance on Him, or does it weaken it? A big influence lately for me has been the news. With so much going on in the world right now, global pandemics and explosions, and who knows what's going to come next. It means that I've been checking on the news more often than I would normally do so. And some checking of world events can be a really positive influence. It's a really good thing to know how to pray. It's good to know what's going on in the world and not just be in our little bubble. But too much checking of world events is completely the opposite of that, especially because of the negative slant that media tends to put on whatever is happening in the world. We don't often hear about good news when we're checking the news. Too much checking of world events can lead to stress and anxiety and wondering at all of the desperation that we see around us. It's an influence that can push us away from God. That's kind of what it was doing for me, I noticed. It became a negative influence. And it will be different for you. We are different people. The things that sway us are different. But I encourage you just to have a little think about it. What influences are you under right now? We're living in this world, and that means that we're going to be subject to those things that surround us. But we can choose. We have the ability to choose what takes the foremost place in our hearts. Let it be Jesus. Thank you so much for joining me again this week for some thoughts from the Bible. I'll see you next time.